Illara stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the golden grass. The air around her was thick, humming with unseen energy. The sky above was vast, shifting hues of violet, gold, and deep blue. It did not stay still as the real sky would. It moved, colors flowing like water, stars drifting lazily, caught in an unseen current. Ahead, the dreaming stag stood motionless. His luminous white coat shimmered like frost beneath the shifting sky. His body was massive, larger than any creature she had ever seen. His breath was slow and steady, but his eyes remained closed. His antlers, once crowned with glowing flowers, were now tangled in thick black vines. The vines pulsed like veins, twisting and curling with every breath he took, tightening around him. The air was heavy. "I am lost," the stag whispered, his voice deep and distant, as though it came from the roots of the earth. Illara swallowed, stepping carefully toward him. She knew this was no ordinary dream. It was something deeper, a place where thoughts became real, where memories took form, where the past and the present melted together. And something was keeping him trapped. She reached out a hand, hesitating just before touching the vines. The moment her fingers neared them, they shuddered and hissed. Then, a voice, not the gentle murmur of the forest, not the deep, ancient voice of the stag, something else. A whisper, curling like smoke in the air. "Why have you come, little wanderer?" Illara froze. The whisper did not come from the stag. It came from the darkness between the vines. "I have come to wake him," she said, steadying her voice. The whisper chuckled, a slow, echoing sound curling around her like mist. "He does not wish to wake," the voice cooed. "He dreams of a time before the forest whispered, before the world became heavy with sorrow." The vines tightened. The stag let out a quiet sigh. His breath stirred the golden grass beneath him, but his eyes remained closed. Illara clenched her fists. The whisper was lying. If the dreaming stag did not wake, the forest would fall silent. The roots would wither. The whispers would fade to nothing. She had to reach him. She took another step forward. The vines hissed, and from the darkness, something began to take shape. The air thickened. A figure emerged from the shadows. It had no single form. It flickered between shapes. times, a tall, cloaked figure with hollow, glowing eyes. At others, a mass of swirling leaves and ashes, shifting with every breath of wind. Ilara felt the weight of its presence press against her skin. "I am the keeper of forgotten things," it murmured, "and this is where lost dreams come to rest." Ilara held her ground. "He is not lost," she said. "He has only forgotten the way back." The keeper tilted its head. Its hollow eyes flickered, unreadable. "Then remind him," it whispered. Ilara hesitated. How? The stag was trapped in a dream too deep. She needed something strong enough to break through the veil of sleep. And then she remembered the lullaby. Softly, she began to hum. The tune was slow at first, trembling in the quiet air. But as she continued, it grew steadier, stronger. The vines shuddered. The keeper of forgotten things did not move. Ilara closed her eyes, letting the song fill her. It was not just a song. It was a memory. The whisper of the wind through the leaves. The murmur of the river against the stones. The heartbeat of the forest itself. She sang, and the vines began to unravel. A shudder ran through the air. The black vines cracked, splitting like ice beneath spring's warmth. The dreaming stag stirred. His breath deepened. His eyes opened fully, silver and bright. The keeper sighed. The vines shriveled, turning to dust. The golden field faded, and the dream collapsed into light. Clara gasped as she woke. She was back in the clearing. The dreaming stag stood tall, awake at last. Silwen's voice was soft. "You have done what no one else could." Ilara let out a slow breath. She had not just woken the stag. She had become part of the whispering forest, and she knew no matter where she went, the whispers would always call her home. Ilara stood in the clearing, her breath still steadying as the whispers of the forest returned around her. The dreaming stag watched her, his silver eyes deep pools of light reflecting the stars above. The night felt different now, as if the air itself had exhaled in relief. Silwen stepped closer, his presence quiet yet powerful, his antlers casting long shadows on the soft earth. "You have woken him," Silwen murmured, "but the dream does not end here." Ilara's fingers brushed the moss beneath her. The ground felt warm, as though the earth itself pulsed with new life. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice softer now, as if afraid to disturb the hush that had settled over the forest. The dreaming stag took a step forward, his hooves making no sound. "I have awoken," he said, his voice deep, resonant, like the echoes of distant thunder, "but there are others who still sleep." Alara felt a chill despite the warmth of the night. Others? She had thought this was the end, the return of the whispers, the restoration of balance. But the stag's words settled in her chest like a quiet weight. "The forest has many voices," someone said, his green eyes glowing faintly. "Some whisper, some sing, but some have fallen silent for too long." Ilara's hands curled slightly into the moss. "Then I will find them." The words left her lips before she had fully thought them through. Yet, as soon as she spoke, she knew they were true. A gentle wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of distant rain. The dreaming stag inclined his great head. "Then your journey continues." The ground beneath Alara's feet shivered. The silver mist around the roots of the great tree thickened, swirling in slow, deliberate motion, forming shapes just beyond recognition. The whispers in the air grew softer, as if something beyond the forest was listening. A path appeared, not a normal path, not one made of dirt or stone, but something older, something woven from the threads of time itself. It shimmered in the moonlight, stretching into the depths of the whispering forest, vanishing into the unknown. Silwen turned his gaze to her. The sleeper beyond the veil awaits. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She did not know what lay ahead. She did not know if she would return. But she stepped forward, and the forest welcomed her. Alara stepped onto the shimmering path, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. The trees around her grew taller, their trunks stretching endlessly into the night sky, their leaves whispering secrets too soft to hear. The air was thick with something unseen, something watching, waiting. She did not hesitate. The dreaming stag had awakened, but now she was bound to a greater purpose. The sleeper beyond the veil, or what awaited her ahead. The silver path pulsed beneath her feet, guiding her forward without a single sound. The deeper she walked, the quieter the forest became. The soft hum of insects faded. The rustling leaves stilled. Even the wind seemed to vanish. It was as if she had stepped into a place outside of time. Then a voice, not a whisper, not the murmuring of the trees, a voice that did not belong to this world. Alara. She turned sharply. Nothing, just trees stretching endlessly into the darkness. She took another step. The path beneath her flickered, as if uncertain of its own existence. The light dimmed. Alara. She knew that voice. She did not want to believe it. Her breath trembled. Grandmother. Silence. Then a shape moved between the trees. She could not see it clearly, only a figure drifting between the shadows, familiar and yet wrong. Her grandmother had passed many seasons ago. This was not her. A cold realization settled in her bones. This place was not empty. It was filled with echoes. Elera, the voice called again, soft, beckoning. She did not move. The air rippled, and suddenly she was not alone. A figure stood before her, cloaked in shifting mist. Its face was obscured, its body flickering between light and shadow. It did not step closer, but the space between them felt thinner, stretched too tight. You are far from home, the figure whispered, though its lips did not move. Alara's fingers curled into her palms. Who are you? The mist swirled. A traveler, it said, voice slow, deliberate, as you are. Something about it sent a quiet chill through her. Do you know of the sleeper beyond the veil? A pause, then a smile not seen but felt. You walk toward them, it said, but do you know what you seek? Elara's jaw tightened. I seek the one who has not yet woken. A low hum passed through the air, as though the trees themselves had sighed. Then you walk into a dream deeper than any before, the figure whispered. Do not lose yourself within it. Before she could speak, the figure was gone. Only mist remained. She exhaled, steadying her breath. She walked on. The path wound deeper into the forest, narrowing as the trees pressed close, their branches intertwining like woven fingers. The air grew colder. Then, ahead, a great archway of stone carved with symbols she did not understand. It stood between two trees, their trunks merging at the top as if bound together. Beyond it, darkness. The whispers returned, soft but endless. Elara knew This was the threshold, the place where the sleeper lay. She stepped forward and crossed into the unknown. Elara stepped through the archway, and the moment she did, the world shifted. The air thickened, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. The whispers swelled, rising in volume, but the words remained just beyond her understanding. They wove together, curling around her like mist, distant voices of something forgotten. She turned back. The archway was gone. Nothing remained but an endless expanse of trees stretching into the deep unknown. There was no path, no way back. A slow breath escaped her lips. There was only forward. The forest here was different. The trees loomed higher, their trunks ancient, their bark smooth and polished like stone. The ground was not covered in moss, but in something else as soft, almost like woven fabric, yet shifting beneath her feet. It rippled with every step, adjusting to her movement, as if the forest itself were breathing beneath her. A single flickering light appeared ahead, not a firefly, not a star, something different. It floated gently, bobbing in the air, watching her. Then another appeared, and another, dozens of them drifting in slow circles, forming patterns she could not decipher. They pulsed softly, as if waiting for something. She reached out a hand. The moment her fingertips grazed the closest light, the world trembled. The trees groaned, their trunks stretching impossibly tall. The whispers around her turned into a single voice. Elara. She stiffened. The voice was neither warm nor cold. It simply was. It filled the space around her, pressing into her mind like a distant memory. You have come to wake me, she swallowed. Are you the sleeper? A pause. I am what remains, the voice answered. The dream before the dreamer. Ilara's breath slowed. I don't understand. A new light appeared before her, larger than the others. It did not flicker, it was steady, endless. It cast no shadow. The forest remembers, the voice said, softer now, but it forgets to. The light pulsed once. She felt something shift inside her. Images bloomed in her mind, ancient roots, stretching through the earth, twisting together, forming rivers of light beneath the soil. A great tree standing in the heart of the forest, its branches woven with golden thread, and beneath it, a figure resting, the sleeper, Elara. The voice surrounded her now, curling through her thoughts. The forest is changing. She felt it, the heartbeat of the earth beneath her, the weight of something ancient stirring. If I wake, the forest wakes with me, the voice murmured. Elara closed her eyes. She could feel the truth in those words. The whispering forest was alive, but something had been lost. If the sleeper remained in slumber, the forest's breath would slow, its voice would fade. What must I do? She asked. A silence stretched between them. Then, step forward. The light before her brightened. It did not blind her, but it filled everything, wrapping around her like a cocoon. She stepped forward, and the world shifted again. The trees vanished. The ground beneath her softened. She was no longer standing. She was floating. The sky above her stretched into eternity, a sea of stars shifting in slow spirals. Below her, the great tree, its branches endless, its roots stretching deep into the unseen. And beneath those roots, a shape rested. Elara drifted downward, drawn by something unseen. The sleeper lay curled within the roots, their form shifting between shadow and light. She knelt beside them, pressing her palm to the earth. The heartbeat of the forest filled her. The dream is deep, the voice whispered, but even the deepest dream must end. Elara exhaled, steadying herself. She closed her eyes, and she began to sing the same melody that had woken the dreaming stag, the lullaby of the river, the whisper of the wind, the sound of the forest remembering itself. The sleeper stirred, a deep, slow breath. The roots around them trembled, the stars above flickered, and for the first time in countless seasons, the sleeper opened their eyes. The forest exhaled, and the dream ended. Elara felt the world tremble as the sleeper opened their eyes. A slow, shimmering light spilled from their form, golden and endless, stretching through the tangled roots and rising toward the sky. The forest shuddered, the very air vibrating with unseen energy. The breath of something ancient and vast filled her lungs, sinking into her bones. For a moment, time itself hesitated. Then the dream shattered. A rushing sound, like wind through countless leaves, roared around her. The world unraveled into light and shadow, spinning outward in endless spirals. Elara gasped, but no air filled her lungs. Suddenly silence, weightless and absolute. Then she was standing. The forest had changed. The trees were taller than before, their bark gleaming as though woven from silver and starlight. The leaves above shone with faint golden threads, their edges flickering like candle flames. The air smelled richer, fuller of deep earth, of morning rain, of something both new and impossibly old. And the sleeper stood before her. Their form was neither human nor beast, neither solid nor shadow, a shifting figure of light and mist, their outline constantly changing at times, a tall being with elongated limbs, at others something formless, woven from pure energy. But their eyes remained steady, deep wells of gold and silver, gazing at her as if seeing beyond flesh, beyond time. "You have woken me," the sleeper said, their voice layered, echoing as if 1,000 whispers spoke at once. Elara's heart pounded, though she felt no fear. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quiet, reverent. The sleeper tilted their head, their expression unreadable. "I am the first dream," they murmured, "the memory of the forest, the echo of once was." Elara frowned. "I don't understand." A deep sound rumbled through the trees. Not speech, not laughter, but something ancient waking from a long slumber. The sleeper raised a hand, if it could be called a hand, and touched the trunk of the nearest tree. The bark pulsed with light, spreading outward in soft golden waves. "The forest is more than trees and roots," they said. "It is the dream of the world, and I am its oldest dream." Elara swallowed. "Then why did you sleep?" The sleeper's golden eyes dimmed. "I was forgotten." The words settled in the air like dust. Elara's chest ached at the quiet sorrow in their voice. She thought of the forest before, of the fading whispers, of the way the trees had seemed to hold their breath. Had they been waiting for this moment? "You are not forgotten now," she said. The sleeper studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, they smiled. The forest stirred. The branches above shifted, bending as if bowing to some unseen force. The roots beneath her feet pulsed with life. A ripple of golden light swept through the trees, vanishing into the distance. "The forest breathes again," the sleeper whispered. Elara turned in a slow circle, watching the change unfold. She could feel it in her bones, and the way the wind carried songs she had never heard before, in the way the light no longer flickered uncertainly. The forest was whole, and yet something lingered in the air. Quiet hum beneath the whispers, a presence just beyond the edge of her understanding. She looked back at the sleeper. "Is it over?" They did not answer immediately. Then they lifted their gaze to the sky, where the stars pulsed like distant heartbeats. "No," they said softly, "not yet." A chill ran through her. Before she could speak, the ground beneath them trembled. The trees shuddered. The golden light in the bark flickered. Something had changed. The sleeper's gaze darkened. Something else wakes. Alara's pulse quickened. What? The air itself seemed to tighten, drawing inward, a held breath before a storm. And then a sound. Not a whisper, not a hum. Something deep, something old. A voice, but not like the sleepers. Not layered and soft, but vast and endless, stretching through time itself. Elara, her breath stopped. The trees bent inward, their trunks creaking, as if bowing to something unseen. The roots curled, pulling back from the earth. The sleeper took a step back. "Elara," the voice said again, and this time the air trembled with it. Something was waking, something deeper than dreams, something that had never been meant to wake. Then the world began to change. The world trembled beneath Elara's feet. The whispers of the forest grew frantic, rising and falling in waves, as if warning her of something unseen. The air felt heavy, thick, with a presence that did not belong. She turned to the sleeper. Their golden eyes were no longer calm. Something had woken that should have remained lost. "Alara," the deep voice spoke again, rolling through the trees like distant thunder. It was neither cruel nor kind, but vast and endless, stretching beyond time itself. It did not belong to the sleeper. It did not belong to the forest. It was something else, something forgotten. The ground beneath her pulsed, waves of unseen energy rippling outward. The trees shuddered, their branches bending as if reaching for something beyond the sky. The golden light that had filled the forest moments ago flickered, uncertain. The sleeper's form shifted, mist curling around them like unraveling threads. "This is not right," they murmured. "This should not be." Elara's chest tightened. "What is it?" The sleeper did not answer. The air around them darkened. The stars above flickered, their light dimming. The deep voice rumbled again, softer this time, almost amused. You do not remember me. Ilara's breath caught. The voice was not unfamiliar. It was buried in the edges of her memory, hidden beneath layers of forgotten dreams. A shadow moved between the trees. It was not a creature, not a being. It was something deeper, something vast, stretching beyond sight and sense. It did not have a body, only an absentient emptiness that consumed the space around it. Ilara felt its presence press against her mind, filling the gaps of what she did not know. And she understood. This was not something waking. This was something returning. The sleeper exhaled, their voice barely a whisper. The forgotten one. Ilara's pulse pounded. Who? The trees groaned under an unseen force. The whispers of the forest turned to a frantic chorus, their voices overlapping, warning, pleading. The golden threads woven through the leaves dimmed. The sleeper turned to her, and for the first time there was fear in their expression. The first silence. The words sent a chill through her bones. The ground beneath them cracked, and then the world shuddered, and the voice spoke again. Ilara, it whispered, closer now, curling around her like the hush before a storm. She turned slowly, and it was there, a figure standing just beyond the edges of sight. It had no shape, no face, only a shifting mass of shadows, deep and endless, stretching into the spaces between stars. It did not move, yet the air around it bent and folded, warping as if reality itself could not hold it. You have woken the forest, the figure murmured, its voice neither loud nor quiet, but absolute, and in doing so, you have woken me. The sleeper stepped between them. You do not belong here, they said, their form flickering with waves of gold and silver light. You were buried beyond the veil, lost, forgotten. The figure tilted its head. Was I? The ground cracked again, a thin line splitting through the forest floor. The light in the trees flickered. Ilara took a step back. What are you? The figure turned toward her, though it had no face. The air around her thickened. You know me, it said. She shook her head. I don't. A slow pause. Then it took a single step forward, and she remembered a forgotten lullaby, a night without whispers, a time before dreams when the forest had not spoken, when there had been only stillness. The first silence, the thing that had once wrapped the world in quiet long before the trees had learned to whisper. "You cannot be here," the sleeper said, their voice urgent now, layered with something Alara had never heard before desperation. "The forest is awake. You do not belong." The figure shifted, its form unraveling, pulling apart like strands of night, and yet it murmured, "I am here." A single light, the last golden thread in the nearest tree, dimmed, and then it went out. The world exhaled. The forest held its breath. And in that moment, the silence began to spread. Ilara felt the silence spread like ink through water. It moved through the trees, curling into the spaces where whispers once lived, unraveling the golden light that had only just begun to return. The air grew still, too still. The sleeper stepped forward, their form flickering. "You must leave," they said, their voice sharp now, layered with something almost like command. "The veil was sealed for a reason. You were never meant to wake." The first silence did not move. "You fear me." It was not a question. The sleeper's form pulsed, gold and silver weaving through their shifting body, flickering like the last embers of a fire. "I fear what you bring," they said. The first silence tilted its head, the movement slow, deliberate. "And what do I bring?" Ilara could feel it, pressing against her skin, wrapping around her like an unseen weight. An absence, not just of sound, of memory, of time, of everything that had ever been spoken, sung, or whispered. "You bring forgetting," Ilara whispered. The first silence turned toward her. "Ah," it murmured, "you do remember." A wind that was not wind passed through the trees. A slow unraveling. One by one, the golden threads woven through the leaves flickered, then dimmed. The sleeper lifted a hand, and for the first time, their form solidified. Their mist-like body condensed, light and shadow drawing together until they stood fully formed, a figure of luminous gold, their presence radiating through the dimming forest. "You cannot stay," they said. "The forest belongs to whispers now." The first silence did not flinch, but it did not always. The sleeper's body pulsed, the golden light pushing outward, but the shadows of the silence did not waver. Ilara swallowed. What are you?" The first silence regarded her for a long moment. I am the world before sound, it said. I am the hush before the first word, the stillness before the first breath. The trees groaned as the silence deepened. The roots beneath Elara's feet curled, tightening. The wind no longer rustled the leaves. There was no wind anymore. A quiet panic stirred in her chest. She had fought to wake the forest, to bring back the whispers, the songs woven into the trees, the gentle hum of the river. But now something older had returned, something that did not belong in a world of voices. The sleeper turned to her. You must choose. Elara's breath caught. Choose? The sleeper's golden gaze met hers, steady, heavy, with something she could not name. The forest cannot hold both dream and silence. The first silence did not speak, but it did not have to. Its presence deepened, stretching into the roots, weaving into the branches. If it stayed, the whispers would fade. The forest would become still, unchanging, silent. Elara clenched her hands. What happens if I choose you? She asked the silence, her voice barely audible. The shadows around it curled. The world will be quiet, it said simply. No more noise, no more dreams, no more remembering. Her stomach turned. And if I choose the forest? The sleeper's gaze did not waver. The silence must return to where it was sealed, they said, and it must remain there. Elara turned back to the first silence. The shadows rippled. You fear losing what has been, it murmured, but tell me, child of the whispering trees, what if the world was never meant to speak? The question sent a shiver through her bones. What if the forest had not always been this way? What if the whispers were not its natural state, but something forced upon it? The trees shuddered. The whispers faltered. The choice was hers. Elara closed her eyes. The heartbeat of the earth pulsed beneath her fingertips. The golden light of the forest flickered. The hush of the silence wrapped around her. She inhaled, and she made her choice. The forest had always whispered to Elara, not in words nor in voices, but in the rustling of leaves when no wind blew, in the hush of distant streams that sang soft lullabies, in the fireflies that flickered in strange patterns at twilight. Her grandmother used to tell her stories of the whispering forest, of how it was alive in ways no other place was. The trees, she said, had memories older than time. They whispered to one another, passing down the stories of the world. But the heart of the forest held a secret home that had been sleeping for centuries. And now it was calling. The path of fireflies. Alara had never stepped beyond the tree line, though she had wandered close 100 times. But that evening, something was different. The sun had just set, and a deep indigo twilight stretched across the sky. The first stars blinking awake. A warm breeze brushed through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and jasmine. Then a flicker of light. At first, she thought it was a firefly, but then another appeared, and another, until a dozen tiny lights floated in the air before her. They pulsed in unison, forming a gentle, glowing trail into the forest. Without thinking, she followed. The moment her foot crossed into the trees, the world seemed to hush. The distant sounds of the village faded, replaced by a deep and watchful silence. Yet she did not feel afraid. The fireflies weaved ahead, guiding her along a path that had not been there before. The ground was soft beneath her feet, covered in a blanket of moss that made her footsteps silent. She walked deeper and deeper, the trees towering above her, their trunks smooth and dark, their leaves shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Then she heard it, a voice. Alara. She stopped. It was not loud nor threatening. It was a whisper, carried by the wind, soft as a sigh. Alara. It came from ahead, where a tree larger than any she had ever seen stood. Its bark gleamed faintly, as if capturing the moon's glow. The air around it pulsed with something unseen, something ancient. She stepped forward. The fireflies had gathered at the base of the tree, circling its trunk like tiny stars caught in orbit. She reached out and placed her hand against the bark. Warm, a heartbeat, a slow, steady rhythm pulsing beneath her palm. Then a shudder. The ground beneath her feet trembled. The air thickened, shimmered, wrapped around her like unseen hands pulling her forward. A rush of wind, a weightless moment, as if she were falling through the very fabric of the world. Then silence. She opened her eyes. The dreaming forest. The forest was no longer the same. The trees stood taller, their leaves glowing with an ethereal silver light. The ground beneath her feet pulsed faintly, as though the very earth was breathing. The air was thick with something unseen, something that hummed just beyond the edge of sound. She had not just entered the forest, she had entered its dream. Alara. She turned. Standing before her was a figure unlike anything she had ever seen. A man, yet not a man. His body was wrapped in woven vines and shadows. His eyes glowed with the deep green of untouched forests, and antlers crowned his brow, their tips flickering like candlelight. "You have come," he said, his voice quiet but strong. "The dreaming stag still sleeps, and if he does not wake, the forest will be lost." Alara swallowed. The dreaming stag, a creature her grandmother had spoken of in hushed tones, as though its name itself was sacred. A being older than the trees, older than the stones, older than time itself. She had always thought it was just a story, but the world around her told her otherwise. "What must I do?" she asked. The figure studied her, his expression unreadable. "The stag has fallen into a sleep too deep," he said. "He dreams, and through his dreams the forest still breathes. But his dreams grow dark. If he does not wake, the whispers will fade, the roots will wither, the forest will fall silent forever." Alara's chest tightened. She glanced around at the glowing trees, at the fireflies that still danced through the air. The idea of this place falling silent, fading into nothingness. It could not happen. "I will find him," she said. The figure nodded, then lifted his hand. The forest shifted. Before her, the trees bent, twisting to form a path where none had been before. At its end, barely visible through the silver mist, lay a river of black glass. "The river of stars," the figure murmured. "Cross it, and you will come to the place where the stag sleeps." Alara took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward. Alara stepped forward, her breath steady, her heart a quiet drum in her chest. Before her stretched the river of stars, a dark, glass-like stream that carried thousands of tiny lights beneath its surface. They drifted lazily, flickering like distant constellations, as though the night sky had fallen and turned to water. A single wooden boat waited at the shore. It had no oars, no sails, only smooth, polished wood that gleamed under the silver glow of the trees. She hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The moment her foot touched the boat, it shivered. The water rippled, sending soft waves of light across its surface. Without a sound, the boat began to glide forward, moving as if guided by an invisible current. Alara knelt, running her fingers across the wood. It was warm almost. She glanced down at the water, watching the stars drift beneath her, their glow shifting, forming shapes she could not quite understand. Then, a shadow. It moved beneath the surface, slow, silent. Alara froze. The shadow was vast, stretching long and serpentine through the river's depths. It glided just beneath the boat, a dark shape against the flickering light. The air grew still. She held her breath. The shadow moved closer. Then, a pair of glowing eyes flickered open beneath the water. Alara's pulse quickened. The creature beneath the surface did not stir. It simply watched, studying. A voice, soft as a ripple, drifted into her mind. Why do you cross the river of stars? Alara swallowed. She did not know how to answer. Then she steadied herself. I seek the dreaming stag. Silence. The shadow beneath her did not move. The boat drifted onward, carrying her closer to the opposite shore. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished. Alara exhaled, her fingers gripping the edge of the boat. A few moments later, the boat touched the shore. She had arrived. The hollow of dreams. The forest on this side of the river was different. The trees were taller, their trunks twisting high into the mist, their branches heavy with glowing silver leaves. The ground was soft, covered in a thick layer of moss that muffled every step. Alara followed the fireflies ahead of her. The air here felt heavier, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then, through the mist, she saw it. A vast clearing. At its center lay a great tree, wider than any mountain, its roots stretching like rivers across the ground, and beneath it, the dreaming stag. Alara stepped closer. The stag was enormous, its white coat shimmering like frost, its antlers stretching high into the sky, covered in tiny glowing flowers. But its eyes remained closed. Its breath slow, deep. it was still lost in sleep. Alara, she turned. Silwen, the antlered guardian, stood at the edge of the clearing. His green eyes were solemn. "You must wake him," he said, "but his dream is deep. You must enter it." Ilara's breath caught. "Enter his dream," she echoed. Selwyn nodded. "The stag dreams in the hollow of time. To wake him, you must find him within his own dream." Ilara hesitated. Then she looked at the stag, at the way his body seemed trapped in some ancient sleep. If she did nothing, the whispers would fade. The forest would fall silent. She could not let that happen. She stepped forward and knelt beside the stag. Then, slowly, she placed her hand against its forehead. A warmth rushed through her, spreading from her fingertips, curling through her veins. The world shimmered, and then darkness. Enjoy the sounds of nature.